Hello, hello, this is Pablo with Meditation Amsterdam. Today we continue with our exploration of the book The Foundations of Mindfulness by Eric Harrison. And in his book, Harrison provides a modern translation of the Satipatthana Sutta, which is the section of Buddhist scriptures as quoted directly from the Buddha that refers to how to meditate, how to cultivate mindfulness. And during last video, we talked about Kaya, which refers to mindfulness of the body. And I want to do almost a second video about that, the whole mindfulness of the body, because there's just a lot to say about it, and I don't think my last video captured the entire thing. But trying to follow a little bit of structure here, I'm going to go on to the second out of 4 foundations of mindfulness. And this second foundation is mindfulness of emotion, also known as Vedana. And so I'm going to read through the passage of how Harrison translated the Buddhist scriptures. And it goes like this. How does a monk observe the valences of phenomena? And by valence, we mean not so much trying to investigate things in depth or what flavor they are, but simply categorizing them as positive or negative and the intensity of that. So you can think of valence as what is known in art and drawing lessons as value. In other words, there's a value scale from pitch black to pure white. And there's a gray scale in between, and there's kind of a neutral value in the middle. And so valences of emotion are like that, and emotions are like that. They have a scale from pleasant to unpleasant, no matter what they are, right? So you could have anger and despair, for example, as being in the negative valence space, and you could have joy and compassion as being in the positive valence space. But rather than going into which one it is, this mindfulness of emotion is really concerned with assessing just the valence itself, which is whether it's positive or negative. So how does a monk observe the valences of phenomena? And by phenomena, it's meant external events, okay? When he experiences a pleasant feeling, he knows this is pleasant. When he experiences an unpleasant feeling, he knows this is unpleasant. He also recognizes those valences that are neither pleasant nor unpleasant. In other words, neutral ones, which is kind of rare if you think about it. In my experience, at least personally, at any given moment during the day, you're either a little bit feeling towards the positive emotion or towards the negative emotion. And yeah, there'll be some times where you are somewhere there in the middle, but they're probably more difficult to detect because there's nothing to detect. But you have to become, according to the Buddha, you have to become mindful of that as well. So you are exercising mindfulness of body and emotion, and another two that I'll talk about later, all the time. Okay. Likewise, he is aware of the positive, negative, and neutral valences that accompany thoughts. Very important. We're going to come back to that. He carefully observes how valences arise and how they pass away, and what causes them to do so. He observes this in both himself and others. He pays attention to valences solely for the purpose of understanding their true nature. In other words, you don't get caught up in the emotion. You simply observe it as closely as you possibly can to understand what its qualities and what it's made of. And he lives alone, reliant on no one, attached to nothing in this world. Okay, so that's again advice for monks, right? We're talking about how does the monk do this or that. And so, of course, this is a monastic discipline that we're talking about in this case. So I'll come back to a couple of points here. One of them is this idea that you want to notice which valences are accompanying which thoughts. Now, look at it this way. Once you start doing this, so the first thing was awareness of the body, which is also a part of the mind if you think about it. You can't feel the sensations in your body if you're not making use of your mind and examining your mind really, right? I mean, every bit of sensory input that comes from your body, such as looking at your hand or feeling it, is really in your mind, it's not in your hand. So you're becoming a student of the mind by doing that, but you're using the body to do so. And that was the first step. And we described how that was the first step because the body is very tangible, it's very gross. So you can very easily say, well, I wonder what my index finger feels like. And then you can feel into it and go, oh yeah, there's a certain temperature around it or within it. There is a sense of aliveness there that you can describe as maybe pulsating or pins and needles, very subtle ones, or little waves in there. If you pay attention close enough to any part of the body, you would feel your heartbeat in there as well. It's not even that big a deal to do so with your fingers, which are very sensitive. It becomes a bigger deal when you can do it with other parts of the body. But it's very gross. So you start with that, and by going deep into your body, really what you're going is deeply into your mind. But it's an easy entrance into the mind. Now, why would you pay so much attention to negative, positive, and neutral valences of emotion? And why would you do so all the time? And moreover, why would you pay attention to the things that make them rise and pass away? It's because you're becoming a very enthusiastic student of your mind. You have been living before that as if your mind just does things, but your mind doesn't just do things. It carries some momentum to it. There is also a certain quality to your mind that you were born with. And then there's the parts about nurture, right? So the way that you were educated. And based on all those things, it processes inputs as well. Right? So you perceive something in your surrounding which creates either a positive or a negative emotion, and then you start to notice those things. Let's take a very simple example. There is a colleague at work that is giving you trouble, or some member of your family that is problematic, and then you notice that whenever you see them, there's a negative emotion that arises. So you start to make that connection. Now, this is pretty obvious, right? Like people talk about this stuff all the time. It's like, oh yeah, I dislike. When you say you dislike someone, what you're really saying is, whenever I think that person, or whenever I interact with them, or see them, like sense their presence, a negative valence of emotion arises in me. That's really what you're saying. You never phrase it like that, but it is that, right? So there is either memory or external input from that person coming into your mental field, and that in turn creates a negative valence of emotion. And it happens the other way around. When you like someone, or when you like a certain food or a certain place, really what is happening is, whenever you remember that person or that place or that food, positive emotions arise within you, which you enjoy, and you call that liking something. This is kind of obvious, but what is not so obvious is the real-time monitoring of that response in yourself, and the real-time monitoring of when that emotion and that valence subsides. And so you're starting to very keenly study your mind, how it responds to things all the time, in real time, all the time. And here comes then the interesting thing, because that applies, of course, to memories and to external impulses like people, places, and so on. But it also applies to your thoughts. So here it says, where are we with the whole thoughts thing? Yeah, so he is aware of the positive, negative, and neutral valences that accompany thoughts. Now, memories, external input, and thoughts are all things that happen to you, as a matter of fact. You don't will these things into existence, really. You are kind of at the mercy of how they pop up, either in your field, externally or in your field internally. But what you try to exercise more and more, to the degree that you have conscious awareness, is noticing the effect that these things have on you. And thoughts are particularly interesting because, of course, negative thoughts and negative self-talk, which is, all right, let's go into that a little bit. So there is a part of your brain which, when your brain is not actively engaged in something, there's a part of your brain called the default network that kicks into action. And its essential job is to worry about the future or regret the past, right? So it's that negative voice in your head that just yaps and yaps on and tells you that you're inadequate or that you should be worried about this or that. It's its job. That's what it does. It's part of what you dampen when you meditate. You start to reduce the activity of that part of your brain. But many people live with that voice in the head without noticing it and paying attention to it. Nor do they pay attention to the toxic cocktail of adrenaline and cortisol that this generates in their body. And so they are at the mercy of that voice and they don't know about it. It's below conscious awareness. So you're starting to bring that into conscious awareness, and you start to notice that, hey, I just thought that I am, not capable of this or that or the other, or I'm nasty because of X, Y, Z. And now I feel the reaction, the emotional negative valence that has in my body. And sometimes I think this interesting thought of like, oh, didn't I just, deliver that speech in a really cool way or establish a cool connection with such and such person? And that brings my emotional valence into the positive side of things. And so you start to notice these things and you start to make those connections. And once those connections start to form, the more real time you do it and the more often you do it, you start to notice, hey, every time I think that silly thought, I feel down. So next time I notice myself feeling it, I'm going to just take note of it and then, maybe put it into question or reframe it or do something about it. Because now you are assessing critically, does it work for you or against you, right? But you need conscious awareness to do that, which is why the injunction of the Buddha is to at all times be monitoring your emotions, the valence. Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it neutral? And to start to study the external and internal impulses that trigger them, so that you start to study your mind and understand and become a student of your mind. And once these things, once something is noticed, it is almost half solved. And it might take some time for the emotion to subside and for you to learn the way to dance with it or to reframe it or to think of something else. But already the first step has been taken. And once that step has been taken, there's no unnoticing that anymore. It has now become part of your map of reality, part of your conscious awareness. And that map, your job is to make that map as wide and broad as possible and as deep as possible as you study your mind. He says also that he pays attention to valences solely for the purpose of understanding their true nature. In other words, as you notice the thought that created a certain positive or negative emotion, and as you notice how that emotion arises, and as you notice how it passes away, you don't judge it, and you don't get attached to it or cling to it. You don't try to amp it up. You don't try to suppress it. That might come later, but especially suppressing negative emotions is a terrible idea because you can never do it. It is something. An emotion is. If you see it in terms of, okay, let's describe it in scientific and sort of more esoteric terms. So in scientific terms, when you're experiencing an emotion, there's a certain part of your brain that becomes active. If it's negative, it's typically a part of your brain that is trying to warn you of danger. So your limbic system is engaged, your brainstem might be engaged, you're in parasympathetic mode, you generate adrenaline and cortisol, and these are things that are, they need to run their course. You cannot stop them in their tracks. You need to almost sort of dance with them and then allow them to fade away by accepting them and just paying very close attention to them. but never fighting them or resisting them, because it's almost like, you know, they want to break through, they want to express and then dissolve. So you must allow them to express. And if we were looking at them from a more esoteric perspective, if you will, then you can think of an emotion as energy that wants to flow. And when we talk energy, we're essentially talking about a process. Energy is change as you see it develop, and so change wants to express itself. It wants to run its course, and it wants to sort of flourish, if you will. So emotions need to be allowed to do that. But what you're doing is, instead of attaching yourself to them when they're good and fighting them where they're bad, what you're doing is you're simply observing them. You're observing them. You're not identifying with them. You're not clinging to them. You're not pushing them away. You're not making stories up about them. And most importantly, especially if it's bad emotions, you don't start to let your thoughts run amok, making up reasons why indeed life is crappy. You simply watch and observe, and your mind will try to create reasons for why that emotion is valid. And if you go into that, now you're going into this negative spiral. Both resistance and story making about bad emotions send you in a downward spiral. What you want to do is you want to neutralize. So you also don't want to push straight back up, but you want to simply observe as closely as you can. And that's where mindfulness of the body becomes handy again, because emotions express themselves also through the body, through sensations in your body. When the emotion is negative, you typically feel it in your throat, it constricts a bit, your chest becomes also a little bit painful, or there's pressure here, and the same goes for your upper or even lower belly. So you will feel them there, and maybe I'll give some advice later on how to make sure that they can subside a little bit easier. But for now, we stick to the advice from the Buddha, which is to observe the valence of your emotion, whether it's positive or negative. You observe carefully what it is that triggered it. You observe it arise, you observe it pass away. And he says you also observe it in others. So you observe it in yourself and you observe it in others. And because others can also be teachers of like, hey, this person is experiencing this or that. You become more empathic. You understand other people better. And through understanding them better, you also understand yourself better. So I hope that was interesting. Once again, meditation is one of the disciplines that help you get or exercise this mindfulness of emotion, if you will. But when it comes to advice from the Buddha, what he suggests is to not just to do this during formal meditation, but really to do it all the time as you go through daily life. So we are reviewing the Foundations of Mindfulness by Eric Harrison. Hope that content was interesting to you, and I'll come back on the next video to talk about mindfulness of states of mind, or chitta. So, see you guys later.